I had graduated less than 24 hours ago when my parents announced that my grandfather's $1 million estate had a new owner. They broke the news gently, as if doing me a favor. I did not argue. I did not cry. They had no idea that days earlier, I had quietly signed a stack of documents ensuring they would never set foot inside that house again. My name is Harley Bauer, and for 26 years, I have existed in the periphery of my own family. I am the background noise in a room where my sister, Renee, is the stereo system turned up to maximum volume. This dynamic was never more apparent than it was the day after my college graduation. A milestone that should have belonged to me but had already been co-opted by the relentless machinery of the Bauer family ego. We were sitting in a restaurant that my mother, Linda, had chosen. It was an upscale bistro in the city center, the kind of place where the lighting was dim enough to hide the prices on the menu, but bright enough to catch the glint of expensive jewelry. My father, Martin, sat at the head of the table, checking his watch every 5 minutes, as if he had a board meeting to attend. Despite being retired for 3 years, Renee sat across from me, scrolling through her phone, occasionally holding it up to show our mother a photo of a dress she wanted to buy or a vacation spot she was dying to visit. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, staring at the condensation sliding down my glass of iced tea. I had graduated cum laude with a degree in business administration less than 24 hours ago. The ceremony had been long, the sun hot, and my parents had complained about the parking situation for the entire duration of the drive home. There had been no toast. There had been no heartfelt speech about how proud they were of me. There was just this lunch, which felt less like a celebration and more like a contractual obligation they were anxious to fulfill so they could get back to the real business of their lives. That business, of course, was the estate of my grandfather, Walter Bauer. Grandpa Walter had passed away 6 months ago. The grief was still a heavy, physical thing in my chest, a dull ache that spiked sharply whenever I thought of his laugh or the smell of his old tobacco pipe. For the last 4 years of his life, while I was balancing a full course load and a part-time job, I had been his primary caregiver. I was the one who drove him to his dialysis appointments 3 times a week. I was the one who learned how to organize his pillbox, separating the blood pressure medication from the heart regulators. I was the one who sat with him on the porch of his lake house, watching the sun dip below the waterline while he told me stories about the war and the wife he missed more than breath itself. My parents and Renee visited on holidays. They brought store-bought pies and stayed for exactly 2 hours, checking their phones and talking loudly about their own lives before kissing his cheek and leaving a cloud of expensive perfume in their wake. They did not know that he preferred his coffee black in the mornings, but with a splash of cream in the afternoons. They did not know that he was terrified of dying alone. But they knew about the house. The lake house was a sprawling, mid-century modern structure sitting on 3 acres of prime waterfront property. Real estate agents had been circling it like vultures for years, dropping unsolicited offers in the mailbox that ranged upwards of $2 million. And then there was the investment fund, a portfolio Grandpa Walter had built quietly over 50 years, compounding interest while he lived a simple life in flannel shirts and worn-out work boots. Renee finally set her phone down, the screen going dark against the white tablecloth. She looked at me, a smile playing on her lips that did not quite reach her eyes. It was a look I knew well. It was the look she wore when she borrowed my favorite sweater and returned it with a stain she refused to explain. It was the look of someone who had already won a game I did not know we were playing. "So, Harley," Renee said, her voice light and airy, "now that you are finally done with school, have you thought about your living situation? The lease on your apartment is up at the end of the month, right?" I nodded slowly. "I was thinking of renewing it. It is close to the city, and if I find a job downtown, the commute is manageable." My mother sighed, a sharp, exasperated sound. She cut into her salmon with surgical precision. "Rent is just throwing money away. Harley, we have discussed this. You need to be smart about your finances, especially starting out." "I have savings," I said defensively. "And Grandpa left me." "That is actually what we wanted to talk to you about," my father interrupted, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. He did not look at me. He looked at Renee, then at my mother, forming a triangle of silent communication that excluded me entirely. The estate is complicated. Harley, probate is a nightmare. The taxes alone are enough to bankrupt someone who is not prepared for it. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. What do you mean? We have been meeting with the family attorney, my mother said. She took a sip of her wine, her eyes fixing on a point somewhere above my left shoulder. To streamline things. You know how overwhelmed you get with paperwork. Harley, you always have. Remember when you lost your Social Security card in high school? I gripped the stem of my glass. That was 10 years ago. I am not overwhelmed. Mom, I handled all of Grandpa's medical records for 4 years. I managed his household accounts. That is different, Renee chimed in. She reached across the table and patted my hand, her skin cool and dry. This is high-level asset management. We just want to make sure the family legacy is protected. We do not want you to stress about property taxes or maintenance costs while you are trying to start your career. So, what are you saying? I asked, though the sinking feeling in my stomach told me I already knew the answer. Renee straightened up, pulling her hand back. She looked at our parents for approval, and my father gave a nearly imperceptible nod. We decided it would be best if the lake house was transferred directly to me, Renee said. She said it casually, as if she were telling me she had decided to order the Caesar salad. Just for convenience, of course, I have more flexibility with my schedule since I'm freelancing right now, so I can oversee the renovations and deal with the property managers. Ideally, we keep it in the family, but it needs a strong hand to manage it. The air left the room, or maybe it just left my lungs. Transferred to you? I repeated, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. But Grandpa left the house to the estate, to be divided. Technically, my father said, his voice dropping an octave, assuming that authoritative tone he used to end arguments before they began. But since you and Renee are the only beneficiaries of that specific tier, we thought it made sense to consolidate. Renee is going to buy out your share. Essentially, over time, we will set up a payment plan once the market stabilizes. But for now, the deed is going to be in her name. It simplifies the insurance and the liability. And the investment fund? I asked. Mom and Dad are going to manage that as trustees, Renee said quickly. Just until you get established, we do not want you blowing through it on rent or a bad car. It is for your own protection, Harley. I looked at them, really looked at them. I saw my mother, who had not visited her own father for the last 3 months of his life because she was too busy planning a renovation of her kitchen. I saw my father, who had spent the funeral talking to a business associate about golf, and I saw Renee, my golden sister, who had called Grandpa smelly when we were children and had refused to hug him because she did not want to wrinkle her blouse. They were not protecting me. They were erasing me. And when was this decided? I asked. Over the last few weeks, my mother said, waving her hand dismissively. We did not want to distract you during finals week. We wanted you to focus on graduating. We are doing this for you, Harley. For me? I echoed. Exactly, Renee said. She smiled, and this time it was a full, beaming expression of victory. I was actually thinking I might move into the lake house next week, just to keep an eye on things. You know, make sure the pipes do not burst or anything. You can come visit, of course, whenever you want. Just call first so I know you are coming. Just call first. In the house where I had spent every weekend for 4 years. In the house where I had held my grandfather's hand as he took his last breath. In the house that was the only place on this earth where I felt safe. I would have to call first, like a guest, like a stranger. They sat there, looking at me, waiting for the gratitude. They expected me to be relieved. They expected the quiet, passive Harley Bauer to nod her head and say, "Thank you. Thank you for taking this burden off my shoulders." They expected me to shrink, just as I had always shrunk, to make room for their expanding egos. But they had made a critical error in their calculations. They assumed that because I was quiet, I was blind. They assumed that because I was gentle, I was weak. They did not know about the afternoons I spent reading legal documents to Grandpa because his eyesight was failing. They did not know about the conversations we had when the morphine made him lucid and fierce. They did not know that Walter Bauer had been a businessman who could smell a shark from 3 miles away, even if that shark was his own daughter. And they certainly did not know about the meeting I had attended 3 days ago, while they were busy picking out their outfits for my graduation. I looked at Renee, who was already mentally measuring the windows for new drapes. I looked at my parents, who were relieved that the unpleasant business of disinheriting their youngest daughter was going so smoothly. A strange sensation washed over me. It was not anger, it was not sadness, it was a cold, crystalline clarity. I picked up my fork and took a bite of my salad. The lettuce was crisp, the dressing tart. I chewed slowly, letting the silence stretch out until it became uncomfortable for them, not for me. "I understand," I said finally. "You are right. Managing a property like that is a huge responsibility. I have been so busy with school. I probably would not even know where to start with the taxes or the upkeep." My mother exhaled audibly, her shoulders dropping 2 inches. "Oh, thank goodness. I told your father you would be reasonable. You are such a good girl. Harley." "Yeah," Renee said, signaling the waiter for the check. "You really are. Do not worry. I will take good care of the place. I am thinking of painting the master bedroom a light sage green. That old blue wallpaper is hideous." The blue wallpaper Grandpa and I had picked out together 2 years ago. I forced the corners of my mouth upward. It felt mechanical, like pulling a lever, but to them, it looked like submission. I smiled at my sister, the thief. I smiled at my parents, the accomplices. "Sage green sounds lovely," I said softly. Inside my head, the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. I saw the timeline they had constructed, the gradual siphoning of funds, the transfer of the deed, the eventual meager allowance they would dole out to me to keep me dependent and grateful. It was a crude, clumsy plan, relying entirely on my compliance. They thought the game was over. They thought they had already crossed the finish line. I took a sip of my iced tea and watched the condensation drip onto the tablecloth, soaking into the fabric, leaving a dark, spreading stain. I smiled, because I knew something they did not. The house they were arguing over, the walls Renee was planning to paint, the legacy they were so desperate to claim, none of it belonged to them anymore. And when the truth finally hit them, it would not be a gentle conversation over lunch. It would be a collision. "Shall we get dessert?" I asked. "I feel like celebrating." To understand why I sat in that restaurant and let my family believe they had won, you have to understand the architecture of my childhood. In the Bauer household, space was not divided by square footage, but by emotional volume, and Renee occupied 90% of it. Growing up, I was defined not by who I was, but by what I was not. I was the one who did not scream in the supermarket when I was denied a candy bar. I was the one who did not slam doors when I was told to clean my room. I was the easy one, the low-maintenance model. My parents wore my compliance like a badge of honor, bragging to their friends about what a good girl I was, never realizing that my silence was not peace. It was a survival strategy. There is a specific memory that stays with me, sharp as a shard of glass. I was 10 years old. It was my birthday, and my parents had bought me a bicycle. It was purple, with white streamers on the handlebars. I loved it instantly. But Renee, who was 12 at the time, decided within 15 minutes that her own bicycle, which was perfectly functional, was suddenly garbage. She threw a tantrum that lasted for 3 hours. She wept. She heaved. She accused my parents of loving me more. By the time the cake was cut, my father took me aside. He crouched down, looking weary, and put a hand on my shoulder. "Harley," he said softly, "you know how your sister gets. Why don't we let her ride the new bike for a while, just to calm her down? You can ride it tomorrow." I surrendered the bike. I always surrendered the bike. That was the pattern. Renee's emotions were treated as natural disasters, hurricanes that had to be weathered, fires that had to be extinguished immediately. My emotions were treated as inconveniences. If Renee was angry, the whole house walked on eggshells. If I was angry, I was told to be reasonable. I learned very early on that in order to keep the family ecosystem stable, I had to make myself small. I had to be the vacuum that absorbed the excess tension. What will Renee think? Became the governing question of our lives. We chose vacation spots based on what Renee would tolerate. We ordered takeout from places Renee liked. My parents were hostages to her volatility, and I was the currency they used to pay the ransom. But there was one person who refused to negotiate with terrorists. Grandpa Walter saw me. While my parents were busy managing the Renee show, I would escape to the study in the lake house. It was a room that smelled of cedar and old paper, a no-fly zone for my sister because she found it boring. Grandpa would be sitting there, usually reviewing the thick stacks of documents that constituted his business life. He did not treat me like a child to be shooed away. He treated me like a fellow inmate. "Pull up a chair. Harley," he would say, not looking up from his ledger. "And tell me, is the coast clear? Or is the siren still wailing?" "She is watching television now," I would report. "Good. Then we have some peace." As I got older, our relationship shifted from conspiratorial to collaborative. When I was 16, I started helping him with the small things, organizing receipts, filing tax documents. At first, it was just a way to spend time with him. But soon, I realized I had a knack for it. I understood the rhythm of numbers. I liked the orderliness of it, the way a column of figures could tell a story that no amount of screaming could drown out. My parents saw me sitting there with him and assumed I was just keeping the old man company. "It is so nice of you to sit with him," my mother would say, usually while on her way out the door to take Renee shopping. "He gets so lonely." They did not know that by the time I was 20, I was effectively his personal secretary. Grandpa Walter's health began to decline in a series of slow, cruel steps. First it was the mobility, then the kidneys. As his body failed, his reliance on me grew. But it was not a burden, it was an education. I managed the schedule for his 3 different specialists. I argued with insurance companies on the phone for hours until they approved his treatments. I balanced his checkbook. I knew exactly how much money was coming in from the dividends and exactly how much was going out to maintain the lake house. I knew the property taxes down to the cent. One afternoon, about 6 months before he died, we were in the study. The autumn light was coming in through the heavy curtains, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Grandpa was in his wheelchair, breathing with that rattle that had become his constant companion. "Read that clause to me again," he said, pointing a shaking finger at a letter from his bank. I read it aloud. It was standard boilerplate about a maturity date on a bond. "They think I am senile," he grumbled. "They think because my legs do not work, my brain has stopped too." "I will write the response letter," I said. "I will tell them to clarify the terms." He looked at me then. His eyes were milky with cataracts, but the gaze behind them was as sharp as a razor. "You are the only one who listens. Harley, your mother hears what she wants to hear. Your father hears what he is afraid to hear. And your sister, well, she only hears her own voice. But you listen." He reached into the drawer of his desk, the one that locked with a small brass key he kept on a chain around his neck. He pulled out a manila envelope. It was not thick, but it looked heavy. On the front, in his shaky, sprawling handwriting, was my name, Harley. "I want you to know where this is," he said. He did not hand it to me. He just showed it to me. "When the time comes, people are going to start talking. They are going to start making plans. They are going to assume things. Do you understand?" "I think so," I said. "This family," he said, tapping the envelope. "They look at this house and they see a summer home. They look at my accounts and they see a shopping spree. They do not understand the work. They have never understood the work. But you do." He put the envelope back in the drawer and locked it. "Don't let them steamroll you. Harley, you have spent your whole life making way for them. When I am gone, you have to stop moving aside." At the time, I thought he was just giving me a pep talk. I thought he was just being the protective grandfather. worried that his quiet granddaughter would be swallowed whole by the grief. But sitting in that restaurant, listening to Renee plan the color of her new bedroom walls, the memory of that envelope came back to me with the force of a physical blow. I realized then that my parents' decision to cut me out was not a sudden impulse. It was the culmination of a lifetime of conditioning. They did not see me as a person who needed a home or security. They saw me as an accessory to Renee's life. If Renee wanted the house, Renee got the house. If Harley needed a place to live, Harley would figure it out because Harley always figured it out without making a fuss. They mistook my competence for independence. They thought that because I never asked for help, I did not need anything. And ironically, they were right, but not in the way they imagined. I did not need their help. I did not need their permission. Because Grandpa Walter had been right. I was the one who listened. I was the one who knew where the keys were kept. I was the one who knew the passwords to the digital accounts. I was the one who knew the name of the lawyer he had trusted for 40 years. A man named Evan Brooks, who despised my father's arrogance as much as Grandpa did. My suspicion hardened into certainty as I replayed the last few months. The way my mother had casually asked for the spare keys to the lake house, just in case. The way my father had asked if Grandpa had ever mentioned a specific safe deposit box. They had been hunting. They had been probing the perimeter, looking for weaknesses, looking for loot. But they had missed the most obvious thing. They had ignored the quiet girl in the corner with the notebook. Grandpa had not just left me an envelope, he had left me a map. And while my family was busy planning their victory lap, I had been following that map to a destination they could not even conceive of. I was done surrendering the bike. I was done being the peacekeeper. Renee laughed at something my mother said, a high, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. I watched her, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to shrink. I felt expansive. I felt powerful. Because I knew what was in the envelope, and I knew what I had done with it. The week following the graduation lunch was a masterclass in soft power. If my family had been a military unit, they would have been the kind that conquers a nation not with bombs, but by slowly cutting off the water supply until the inhabitants simply leave of their own accord. It began with a phone call from my mother. Linda, on a Tuesday morning. The sun was barely up over the lake, casting long, pale shadows across the deck where I was drinking my coffee. I was staying at the house, as I had been for the better part of the last year, keeping the air stagnant and the dust settled. Harley, honey, her voice chirped through the receiver, entirely too bright for 7 in the morning. I was just looking at some listings in the city. There is a darling studio apartment on 4th Street. It has exposed brick, very trendy. I think it would be perfect for you. I took a sip of coffee, feeling the warmth travel down my throat. I am not really looking for a studio. Mom, I have my things here. I am comfortable. Comfortable, she repeated, testing the word as if it were a piece of fruit she suspected was rotten. But is it healthy? Being out there all alone in that big, old house? It is so isolated. Your father and I worry about you. We think it would be better for your mental state to be around people your own age. You know, to help you transition into the real world. There it was. The implication that my time caring for Grandpa had been a suspension of reality, a vacation from adulthood, rather than a grueling 24-hour job. I am fine, Mom, I said. Well, just think about it, she pressed. We want you to get settled before things get chaotic with the estate. It would be so much easier if you were already moved out. For your own sake. We do not want you to have to deal with the noise and the contractors once Renee starts her project. She hung up before I could ask what project she was referring to. By Wednesday, the assault shifted from emotional manipulation to pseudo-logical rationalization. My father, Martin, drove out to the lake house. He did not bring food or ask how I was doing. He brought a clipboard. He walked through the living room, tapping his pen against the paper, making tisking sounds at the state of the floorboards. I followed him, silent as a ghost. The maintenance on this place is astronomical, he said, gesturing vaguely at the high vaulted ceilings. The heating bills alone could bankrupt a young person. Grandpa managed it, I said quietly. Walter had resources, my father corrected sharply. And now, we have to make sure those resources are deployed intelligently. I sat down with Renee yesterday. She has some very aggressive ideas about leveraging the equity in this property to expand her design portfolio. It makes sense, Harley, from a business perspective. He turned to me, his face arranging itself into a mask of paternal wisdom. You have always been the quiet one. Harley, you like your books, you like your solitude. This house, it demands a certain presence. It needs to be a hub. Renee is better suited for that. She can network here. She can host. It is about maximizing the asset. You understand that, don't you? Suitability, that was the word he used. As if inheritance was a job interview I had failed because I did not have enough charisma. I understand you think Renee is better at throwing parties, I said. He chuckled, missing the sarcasm entirely. Exactly, and we want to protect you from that burden. If the house is in Renee's name, she takes on the liability, she takes on the risk. You get to walk away clean. We are doing this for you. Harley, we want you to be free. Free. They kept using that word, but every time they said it, it sounded like homeless. What was fascinating, as I watched them tighten the noose, was what they did not say. In all these conversations about suitability and burden and convenience, not a single person mentioned the word will. Not once did my father say, as per the executor's instructions. Not once did my mother say, this is how the estate is legally divided. They were operating entirely in the realm of assumption. They believed that if they created enough momentum, the legal reality would simply bend to match their desires. They thought that if they acted like the house belonged to Renee, it would become true by default. On Friday, Renee arrived. She did not knock. She simply unlocked the front door with the key my mother had given her and breezed in, followed by her boyfriend of the month, a man named Chad who wore sunglasses indoors. Ugh, it smells like old medicine in here, Renee announced, dropping her designer bag on the hallway table, the antique table Grandpa had brought back from Germany in 1965. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes. I dried my hands and walked out to meet them. Hi, Renee, I said. She glanced at me, then looked past me to the living room windows. Hey, look, Chad and I are just here to take some measurements. I am thinking of knocking down this wall to open up the flow. What do you think? She didn't wait for an answer. She pulled a tape measure from her purse and started walking the perimeter of the room. Renee, I said, keeping my voice level, you are planning renovations? Obviously, she said, the metal tape snapping back into its casing with a sharp thwack. I cannot live here with it looking like a nursing home. No offense. Harley, I know you did your best, but the vibe is very depressing. The probate hasn't even cleared yet, I said. It was a test. I wanted to see how she would react. Renee waved her hand dismissively. Oh, Dad is handling the paperwork. It is just a formality. He said since we are all in agreement, the judge just stamps it. The important thing is getting the contractors lined up before the summer rush. You know how hard it is to get good help. Since we are all in agreement. That was the linchpin. Their entire plan rested on the assumption that I had agreed. They had interpreted my lack of screaming as consent. They had taken my silence for submission. I felt a vibration in my pocket. I reached in and tapped the screen of my phone, ensuring the voice memo app was still running. I had been recording every interaction since the lunch, every phone call, every visit, every casual dismissal. And what about my things? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. I live here, Renee. She stopped and looked at me, her expression softening into a pity that was far more insulting than her arrogance. I know, sweetie, and that is why Mom found that cute place in the city. Look, you can take your time packing. Seriously, take a few days. But I have the painters coming in next week, and I do not want your clothes getting dust on them. Ideally, if you could have the guest room cleared out by Monday, that would be amazing. Monday, I repeated. Today is Friday. I know. It is tight, she said, flashing a dazzling smile. But we are doing this for the family, right? We want to get the house ready for the 4th of July party. Dad wants to invite the partners. It is a big deal for everyone. She turned back to Chad. Babe, write this down. 12 feet by 14 feet for the dining area. I walked back into the kitchen. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the sheer adrenaline of suppressed rage. They were evicting me. They were kicking me out of the home I had saved from ruin, the home where I had wiped my grandfather's brow and held his hand, so they could throw a party to impress my father's golf buddies. I stood by the kitchen island, staring at the granite countertop. I could hear them in the other room, laughing. Renee was already mentally rearranging the furniture, erasing the last traces of Walter Bauer to make room for her own vanity. I waited until they moved out onto the back deck. I crept closer to the screen door, my phone held tight in my hand. Yeah, it is huge, I heard Renee say. She was on a call now. Listen, can we bump the move to Sunday? Yeah, the current tenant is moving out faster than expected. Just bring the big truck. We are going to clear out a lot of the old junk immediately. The current tenant, old junk. That was me, and that was Grandpa's life. Sunday works, she said. Perfect. Send me the invoice. She hung up and laughed. Done. God, this is going to be so much better once we gut this place. Sunday, 2 days away. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They were not waiting for legal permission. They were bringing a truck on Sunday to physically remove the contents of the house, and likely to change the locks. If I was still here, they would simply pressure me until I left. They would make it so uncomfortable, so humiliating, that I would flee just to escape the scene. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. I did not have days. I had hours. I went to my room, the small guest room on the first floor that I had occupied, so I could be close to Grandpa at night. I grabbed my purse. I checked that the recording had saved. Then, I went to the closet and pulled out the small, fireproof box where I kept my own essential documents. I walked out the side door, bypassing the living room where Renee was currently explaining to Chad why the fireplace needed to be resurfaced with Italian marble. I got into my sedan, a 7-year-old car that I had bought with my own money from waiting tables. I backed out of the driveway quietly. As I turned onto the main road, I looked in the rearview mirror. The house stood there, majestic and stoic against the tree line. It looked vulnerable. It looked like a fortress that had been breached because the guards were asleep. But the guard was not asleep. She was just changing tactics. I drove toward the city, ignoring the speed limit. I was not going to the apartment my mother had found. I was not going to a friend's house to cry. I was going to the one place my family had avoided for 6 months. I was going to the office of Northline Trust Services to see a man named Evan Brooks. My father thought he was playing chess. He thought he was moving pieces on a board that he controlled. He did not realize that while he was staring at the pawns, the king had already been captured. I dialed the number on my car's Bluetooth. Law Office of Evan Brooks, a receptionist answered. This is Harley Bauer, I said, my voice steady, stripped of all the hesitation my family expected from me. I need to see Mr. Brooks immediately. Tell him it is about the Walter Bauer estate. And tell him the vultures have landed. To understand why I was driving toward the city with a heart rate that was surprisingly steady, you have to understand that the real battle had not started on that Sunday when Renee ordered the moving truck. It had started 3 weeks earlier, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, inside the hushed, sterile office of Northline Trust Services. This was the meeting I had alluded to, the secret foundation upon which I was building my entire defense. The office of Evan Brooks was a stark contrast to the performative chaos of the Bauer family home. There were no shouting matches here, no passive-aggressive sighs, no emotional blackmail. There was only the smell of lemon polish, the hum of the air conditioning, and rows of leather-bound books that contained the only thing that mattered in this world, the law. Evan Brooks was a man my grandfather had trusted for 40 years. He was in his late 60s, with silver hair and eyes that looked like they had seen every variety of human greed and found them all incredibly boring. He did not offer me tea. He did not ask how my classes were going. He simply pointed to the chair opposite his desk and opened the file I had brought with me, the contents of the envelope Grandpa had left in the locked drawer. "So," Evan said, leaning back in his chair and tenting his fingers, "they have started—" It was not a question. "Not officially," I replied, sitting with my back straight, hands clasped on my lap. "But the comments have started. My father is talking about property taxes being a burden. My mother is sending me apartment listings. Renee is talking about renovations." Evan nodded slowly. "Ah, the soft takeover. It is a classic strategy. Harley, they do not want a legal fight because they know the will is clear. So, they create a factual reality on the ground. They move in, they change the locks, they start paying the utility bills. They create a narrative of ownership so that by the time probate is actually finalized, displacing them feels like an act of aggression. They are banking on the fact that you will not have the stomach to evict your own family." "They think I am weak," I said. It was not a complaint. It was a data point. "Are you?" Evan asked. His gaze was direct, stripping away any pretense. "I was," I admitted, "but I cannot be anymore. Grandpa asked me to listen. I am listening." Evan opened the folder on his desk. Inside were the documents that Walter Bauer had drawn up 5 years ago. Documents that my family knew nothing about. "Your grandfather was a realist. Harley," Evan said, his voice dropping to a gravelly low register. "He loved your mother, he tolerated your father, and he found your sister exhausting, but he knew that if he simply left the house to you in a standard will, they would torment you, they would drag you through court for 10 years, they would bleed the estate dry with legal fees just to spite you." He slid a single sheet of paper across the polished mahogany desk. "That is why he drafted this option. He never executed it because he hoped he would not have to. He hoped your mother would step up. He hoped your sister would grow up. But he gave me strict instructions. If you came to me, and if you told me they were circling, we were to activate the nuclear option." I looked down at the document. The words were dense, but the title was clear. The Walter Bauer Irrevocable Family Trust. "What does this mean?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "It means we take the chessboard away," Evan explained, tapping the paper with his index finger. "Right now, the house and the investment accounts are part of the general estate. They are subject to probate. That is the window your family is trying to crawl through. But if we activate this trust, the assets are transferred immediately. The house does not belong to the estate anymore. It belongs to the trust." "And who controls the trust?" "You do," Evan said. "Sole trustee, you have absolute discretion over the assets, the maintenance, and the distribution. You decide who lives there, you decide who gets a key, and because it is an irrevocable trust established based on the authority granted to you as the executor in the preliminary filings, which you signed last week, it is nearly impossible for them to pierce." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This was not just a defense. This was a weapon. "They will hate me," I whispered. It was the last gasp of the old Harley, the one who just wanted everyone to get along. "If I do this, I am locking them out. I am taking the one thing they want most." "Harley," Evan said, his voice softening just a fraction. "They do not want the house. They want the money the house represents. And they want the status. If Renee gets that house, she will leverage it for loans within 6 months. She will mortgage it to fund some business venture that will fail, and the bank will foreclose on it within 3 years. Your grandfather knew that. He sat in this exact chair and told me, if Renee gets the lake house, she will sell the view to buy a mirror." I let out a short, dry laugh. That sounded exactly like Grandpa. "He wanted you to have it because he knew you would keep it." Evan continued. "He knew you would protect the land. He knew you respected the history, but he also knew you would need a shield." Evan opened a second drawer and pulled out a fresh stack of documents. They were thick, bound with heavy staples. "This transfers the deed of the property at 1224 Lakeview Drive into the trust. This second document moves the $1.2 million in the primary investment account into the trust's holdings. Once you sign these, the property is no longer legally available for your parents to manage or for your sister to renovate. It is gone. It is a fortress with the drawbridge pulled up. I stared at the signature line. It was just a black line on a white page, but it felt like a cliff edge. "Do I have to tell them?" I asked. "Right now?" "No," Evan said. "In fact, I advise against it. Let them play their hand. Let them commit. The more they act like they own it, hiring contractors, moving furniture, making demands, the more foolish they will look when the hammer drops. We will file these with the county clerk tomorrow morning. By the time they realize what has happened, the ink will have been dry for weeks." I reached for the pen. My hand hovered over the paper. I thought about the dinner parties where I was seated at the children's table until I was 20. I thought about the way my father looked through me. I thought about Renee, measuring the walls for drapes before Grandpa's body was even cold. But mostly, I thought about the envelope Grandpa had left me. Inside, there had been a note, just 3 words, written in his shaky scrawl. "Don't trust words." He knew. He had always known. I gripped the pen. The fear was there. A tight knot in my stomach. The fear of breaking the tribal code of the family. But underneath it, rising like a tide, was relief. It was the relief of finally putting down a heavy weight I had been carrying for 26 years. I did not have to earn their approval anymore. I did not have to beg for my space. I signed my name, Harley Bauer. The ink flowed smoothly, dark and permanent. I signed the deed transfer. I signed the bank authorization. I signed the trustee acceptance form. Page after page, I dismantled my family's expectations. When I finished, Evan took the stack, organized it neatly, and placed it in his outbox. "Congratulations, Ms. Bauer," he said, using the title with a gravity my father never had. "You are now the sole owner of the Bauer estate. Technologically speaking, you are their landlord." "Thank you, Evan," I said. My voice sounded different to my own ears. Deeper, steadier. "One more thing," Evan said, pausing before he closed the file. "Your grandfather told me that if you actually went through with this, if you actually had the courage to sign those papers, I was to tell you something." I looked up. "What?" "He said that for his whole life, he was the one who had to be the strong one. He carried the family. He carried the business. He said he was tired. He said, 'Tell Harley that now it is her turn to drive the truck.'" I walked out of that office 3 weeks ago with the ghost of a smile on my face. Now, as I drove my actual car toward Evan's office on this frantic Friday afternoon, fleeing the scene of Renee's invasion, I was not going there to ask for help. I was going there to collect the ammunition we had stored away. Renee had ordered a moving truck for Sunday. She thought she was going to clear out the old junk. She had no idea that I was about to park a legal tank on the front lawn. I pulled into the parking lot of Northline Trust Services, turned off the engine, and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I did not look like the easy sister anymore. I looked like the trustee. I got out of the car and walked toward the glass doors. It was time to close the trap. I drove back from Evan Brooks' office with the window down, letting the cool evening air rush over my face. It was a strange sensation, carrying a nuclear codes case in the passenger seat of a 7-year-old sedan. But that was essentially what the folder of signed trust documents represented. When I pulled into the driveway of the lake house, Renee's car was still there. The lights were on in the living room, blazing a golden yellow against the twilight. From the outside, it looked like a warm, inviting family home. Inside, I knew it was a shark tank. I walked in through the kitchen door. The air smelled of takeout Thai food and expensive perfume. My mother, Linda, was wiping down the counter, while Renee sat at the island, scrolling through her tablet with a stylus. My father was in the living room, watching the financial news on the television at a volume that was just slightly too loud. They all looked up when I entered. The tension in the room was palpable, a physical thing, like static electricity before a lightning strike. They were waiting for the breakdown. They were waiting for me to cry, to beg, or to scream about the injustice of being evicted from the home I had maintained for 4 years. I decided to give them exactly what they wanted, but with a twist. I started packing. I lied smoothly. I went to pick up some boxes. The tension broke instantly. My mother let out a breath she must have been holding since I left that afternoon. "Oh, Harley," she said, her voice dripping with that cloying, weaponized sweetness. "I knew you would be sensible. I told your father. Harley always does the right thing. Did you see the link I sent you for the movers? They are very reasonably priced." "I saw it," I said, putting my keys on the counter. "Thank you, Mom." Renee looked up from her tablet, a smug satisfaction curling the corner of her lip. "It is for the best. Harley, really, you do not want to be here when the construction starts. It is going to be a dust bowl. I am doing you a favor, honestly." "I appreciate it," I said. "I really do." I walked over to the refrigerator and grabbed a bottle of water. I moved with deliberate slowness, forcing myself to relax my shoulders. This was a performance. I was an actress in a play they did not know was a tragedy for them. "So," I said, leaning against the counter and looking at my father, who had wandered into the kitchen during the commercial break. "Since I'm moving out on Sunday, I just want to make sure everything is official with the house." My father stiffened slightly. He exchanged a quick glance with Renee. "What do you mean, official?" "I mean the paperwork," I said, keeping my tone innocent. "You said the deed was being transferred to Renee. Is that all done? I would hate for there to be any legal confusion once I leave. You know how strict the county can be about occupancy and insurance." My father puffed out his chest. It was his tell. Whenever he was about to deliver a lie that made him feel powerful, he expanded physically. "Everything is taken care of. Harley," he said, his voice booming with authority. "The lawyers have handled it. The deed transfer is already in motion. As of Monday morning, this house is effectively Renee's property. That is why we need you out by Sunday night. We need a clean handover." "So it is signed?" I pressed gently. "The house is legally hers?" 100%, Renee chimed in, not looking up from her screen. "I am actually meeting the locksmith on Monday morning to change the codes. No offense, Harley, but I cannot have you just wandering in whenever you feel nostalgic. I need privacy." "Of course," I said. "Privacy is important." I took a sip of water to hide the smile that threatened to break through. They were lying. They were lying so effortlessly, so casually. There was no deed transfer in motion. They could not transfer the deed because the deed was currently sitting in a fireproof safe in Evan Brooks' office, locked inside the Walter Bauer Irrevocable Family Trust. My father was bluffing, assuming that his word was law and that the actual legal system would catch up to his ego eventually. "Well," I said, setting the bottle down, "if it is all done, then I guess I have nothing to worry about." "Exactly," my mother said, reaching out to pat my arm. Her touch felt cold. "You just focus on your new life. Let us worry about the legacy." I excused myself and went to my room, the guest room they were so eager to reclaim. I did not pack. Instead, I opened the small shopping bag I had brought in with me. It did not contain cardboard boxes. It contained 4 high-definition wireless security cameras I had purchased at an electronics store on the way home. Grandpa Walter had been old-fashioned about many things, but he had appreciated technology when it served a purpose. He used to say that a man's memory is faulty, but a photograph never forgets. I waited until 2 in the morning. The house was silent. My parents had left hours ago to go back to their own house in the suburbs, and Renee was asleep in the master bedroom, Grandpa's room, which she had claimed with zero hesitation. I moved through the house like a ghost. I was not breaking any laws. I was the sole trustee of the property. I had the legal right to secure the premises. I placed the first camera on top of the china cabinet in the dining room, hidden behind a decorative vase. It had a perfect view of the main hallway and the front door. I placed the second one in the living room, tucked discreetly between 2 books on the high shelf. The third one went in the kitchen, sitting innocuously on top of the refrigerator, blending in with the shadows. The fourth one I kept for my own room. I connected them all to a cloud account on my phone, ensuring the little recording lights were taped over with black electrical tape so they would remain invisible. I checked the feed on my screen. The night vision was crisp. I could see the empty living room, the silent kitchen. Every word they said, every move they made from this point forward would be documented. If they wanted to play games with reality, I was going to make sure I had the master tape. Once the cameras were set, I returned to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving behind a deep, hollow exhaustion. I reached into my nightstand drawer and pulled out the manila envelope Grandpa had left. This was not the official legal file I had given to Evan. This was the personal one, the one he had kept separate. I had opened it before, of course, to retrieve the contact information for the trust, but I had never truly absorbed the weight of the single piece of stationery left inside. I pulled it out now, holding it under the beam of my small reading lamp. It was a piece of his personal letterhead, thick and cream-colored. In the center of the page, in his shaky, unmistakable handwriting, was a single sentence. Don't trust words. He hadn't written "I love you" or "good luck." He hadn't written a sentimental goodbye. He had written a warning. Grandpa Walter knew his daughter. He knew his son-in-law. And he certainly knew his other granddaughter. He knew that they were people who used language not to communicate truth, but to construct it. They used words to manipulate, to bully, and to gaslight. He knew that if I listened to what they said, I would be lost. I had to watch what they did. Don't trust words, I whispered to the empty room. My father had said the deed was transferred. That was a word. Renee had said she was the owner. That was a word. My mother had said they were doing this for me. That was the biggest word of all. But the truth was not in their mouths. It was in the documents I had signed. It was in the camera lenses watching the dark hallway. It was in the silence of this house that recognized me as its only true guardian. Saturday passed in a blur of surreal performance art. I spent the day moving stacks of books from one side of the room to the other, making enough noise to simulate packing. My mother came over at noon with sandwiches, playing the role of the supportive parent. It is going to be so nice for you to have a fresh start, she said, watching me fold a sweater. No baggage, just you and your future. Yes, I said, placing the sweater into a box I had no intention of sealing. A fresh start. Renee spent the day on the phone with contractors. I heard her walking through the house, her voice echoing in the hallway. Yes, I want the kitchen island ripped out completely, she said. I want quartz, white quartz, and the floors need to be sanded down. They are too dark. She was standing in the kitchen, directly under the camera I had installed the night before. I checked my phone. The feed was perfect. I had a high-definition recording of her ordering the destruction of property she did not own. And the locks? She continued. Monday morning, 8 o'clock sharp, I want everything rekeyed. I do not want any old copies floating around. She walked past me as I was carrying a stack of towels. She didn't offer to help. She just sipped her iced coffee and smiled. Almost done? She asked. Getting there, I said. Good, because the movers are coming at 9 tomorrow. I told them to start with the furniture in the living room. Mom wants that old sofa gone. It smells like dust. Grandpa loved that sofa, I said involuntarily. Renee rolled her eyes. Grandpa also loved watching the Weather Channel for 6 hours a day. We are moving on. Harley, you should too. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors. The floors she wanted to sand down because they were too dark. I went back to my room and closed the door. I sat down at my small desk and opened my laptop. I logged into the bank portal for the new trust account Evan had set up. The balance stared back at me. $1.2 million, plus the valuation of the house. It was safe. It was locked down. I looked at the time. It was 7 in the evening on Saturday. 13 hours until the trucks arrived. 13 hours until the collision. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. For years, I had been afraid of this moment. I had been afraid of the conflict, afraid of being the disappointment, afraid of being the one who ruined the family portrait. But looking at that camera feed, watching my sister point at the walls she planned to destroy, I realized the portrait had been ruined a long time ago. They had ruined it with their greed. They had ruined it with their cruelty. All I was doing was taking the frame off the wall. I turned off the light and lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house, the creak of the settling wood, the hum of the refrigerator, the wind off the lake rattling the window pane. "Don't worry," I whispered to the house. "I am not going anywhere." Tomorrow, they would bring their truck. Tomorrow, they would bring their arrogance. But tomorrow, I would bring the truth. And for the first time in the history of the Bauer family, the truth was going to be the loudest thing in the room. Sunday morning arrived wrapped in a shroud of gray fog that rolled off the lake, obscuring the tree line and turning the water into a flat, lifeless sheet of steel. It was the kind of weather that felt heavy in your lungs, damp and clinging, stripping the color out of the world until everything was a variation of slate and charcoal. I was awake long before the sun struggled to break through the overcast sky. I sat in the kitchen, drinking black coffee, watching the digital feed on my phone from the cameras I had installed the night before. The house was silent, but it was a waiting silence. It was the silence of a courtroom before the gavel strikes. At exactly 9 o'clock, the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the stillness. I walked to the front window, keeping myself hidden behind the sheer curtain. 2 cars pulled into the driveway, parking aggressively close to the front steps. The first was my father's pristine sedan, polished to a shine despite the threatening rain. The second was Renee's convertible, top up, looking ridiculous and out of place against the backdrop of the rugged, wooded lot. They did not park like guests. Guests leave room for others. They parked at angles, claiming the space, blocking the exit. It was a tactical formation. I watched them emerge. My father, Martin, stepped out first, adjusting his jacket as if bracing for a stiff wind. He looked grim. The reluctant patriarch coming to do the hard work of leadership. My mother, Linda, followed, clutching her purse to her chest, her face set in a mask of tragic necessity. And then there was Renee. She stepped out of her car wearing white jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car. She wore sunglasses despite the absolute lack of sunlight. She slammed her car door with a sense of finality that echoed through the frame of the house. She did not look at the lake. She did not look at the trees. She looked at the front door, her eyes sweeping over the peeling paint on the railing with a look of critical ownership. I opened the front door before they could knock. I wanted to control the threshold. "Good morning," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the tremor they were undoubtedly expecting. "Morning, Harley," my father said, brushing past me into the foyer without making eye contact. He carried a leather portfolio under his arm. "It's damp out there. Good day for moving. Though, keeps the heat down." "Hi, honey," my mother said, pausing to offer me a tight, grimacing smile. "Did you sleep well? I know transitions can be hard." Renee brought up the rear. She pulled her sunglasses off and hooked them into the neckline of her sweater. She looked around the hallway, sniffing the air. "Did you pack the coat rack?" she asked, pointing to the antique brass stand in the corner. "I told you I did not want that staying. It is hideous." "I moved my things to the back room," I said, keeping my hands clasped in front of me. "Just like you asked." My father cleared his throat and walked to the center of the living room. He placed the leather portfolio on the coffee table, Grandpa's coffee table, stained with the rings of 1,000 mugs of tea, and unzipped it. The sound of the zipper was sharp, like a weapon being unsheathed. "All right," he said, commanding the room. "Before the movers get here with the big truck at noon, we need to handle the administrative side of things. We want this to be clean. Harley, no loose ends." He pulled out a stack of papers. They were crisp, stapled in the corner, with legal-looking headers. He did not hand them to me. He held them out, waiting for me to come to him. "This is just a standard acknowledgement of vacating," he said, "and an inventory release. Basically, It says you are leaving the premises voluntarily and you are not taking any fixtures or property that belongs to the estate. It protects Renee from any liability if you claim you left something behind later. And, Renee added, stepping forward, it confirms that you understand the new ownership structure, just so you do not try to come back next week claiming you have tenant rights. Dad said we have to be careful about squatters' laws. Squatters' laws. She was talking about her own sister, in the house where we had both learned to walk. I took the papers. I felt the weight of them in my hands. They were nonsense. Of course, legally. They were worth less than the paper they were printed on because the people presenting them had no authority to draft them. But to them, these papers were the Bible. I looked down at the first page. Notice of intent to vacate and transfer of possession. I read the first paragraph. My eyes scanned the legal jargon they had likely downloaded from a template website or had their family attorney draft in a hurry. This agreement is made between the estate of Walter Joseph Bauer, owner, and Harley Ann Bauer, occupant. I stopped. My eyes narrowed slightly. I looked closer at the second paragraph, where the property description was listed. Regarding the residential property located at 12th and 24 Lakeview Drive, Waverly County. And there it was, a small, insignificant error that screamed of their carelessness. Grandpa's legal name was Walter Joseph Bauer, but in the section listing the deed reference number, they had typed Walter Jacob Bauer. It was a mistake my mother often made because her own father's name was Jacob, and she never bothered to correct herself. It was a mistake that would have made any actual legal filing voidable, or at least problematic. But more than that, it proved they had not even looked at the original deed. If they had looked at the deed, they would have seen the correct name. They were operating off memory and arrogance. I felt a bubble of laughter trying to rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down, turning it into a cough. Is something wrong? Renee asked sharply. Do not tell me you are going to nitpick the language. Harley, it is standard boilerplate. I looked up at her. I looked at the impatience in her eyes. She wanted this over. She wanted to get to the part where she picked out paint swatches. She did not care about the name. She did not care about the man who had built this life. She only cared about the asset. No, I said softly. Nothing is wrong. I looked at my father. He was checking his watch, already mentally moving on to his tea time or his lunch reservation. Do I need to sign it now? I asked. Please, my father said, handing me a pen, a heavy, expensive fountain pen. Let us get it done. I walked over to the dining table. I laid the document down. I did not point out that they had the wrong middle name. I did not point out that the owner, listed at the top of the page, no longer held the title. I did not point out that as the trustee of the Walter Bauer Irrevocable Trust, I was the only person in the room with the power to sign anything regarding this property. I leaned over and signed my name, Harley Bauer. I did not sign agreed. I simply signed my name acknowledging receipt. It was a subtle distinction, but a legally significant one. I capped the pen and handed it back to my father. He took it, relieved. He let out a long breath, his shoulders dropping. He smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile of victory. Good girl, he said. I knew you would be reasonable. This is better for everyone. Harley, you will see. Now, Renee said, clapping her hands together. Since that is done, we are going to head into town to grab some brunch before the movers get here. I cannot deal with dusty furniture on an empty stomach. You should probably be gone by the time we get back. Harley, it will be less awkward. Yeah, my mother agreed. We can say our goodbyes now. We will come visit you in your new apartment once you are settled, maybe next week. They were dismissing me. They had the signature. They had the keys. Or so they thought. I had served my purpose. Okay, I said. I understand. Leave the keys on the counter, Renee instructed, pulling her sunglasses back onto her face even though it was still dark and gloomy inside. And make sure the back door is locked. I will, I said. They turned and walked out. They moved with a lightness that was almost insulting. They chatted as they walked down the front steps, their voices carrying in the damp air. I think we should do the kitchen first, I heard Renee say, and maybe we can knock down that wall to the den today. The contractor said he could do a demo on Sunday if we paid cash. Whatever you want, sweetheart, my father replied. It is your house. I stood in the doorway and watched them get into their cars. They backed out of the driveway, tires crunching on the gravel, heading toward town, toward mimosas and Eggs Benedict, celebrating the successful acquisition of $1 million asset they had bullied away from their youngest daughter. They drove away believing that Harley Bauer was defeated. They believed I was currently inside, crying, packing the last of my meager belongings, preparing to slink away into the obscurity they had assigned to me. I closed the front door. The latch clicked shut with a satisfying, heavy sound. I did not go to the back room to pack. I walked into the kitchen and picked up my phone. I checked the time. It was 10:30 in the morning. I dialed a number. Evan, I said when he answered. I am here. Harley, the lawyer's voice came through, clear and grounded. Are they gone? They just left, I said. They are going to brunch. They said the movers and the demo crew are coming at noon. Perfect, Evan said. That gives us 90 minutes. I am pulling into the driveway now. And Harley? Yes? You might want to make some coffee, he said. It is going to be a long afternoon. I hung up the phone and walked to the window. I saw Evan's unassuming sedan turn into the driveway, followed by a sheriff's vehicle. My family thought the war was over. They thought they had won because the enemy had surrendered without firing a shot. They were about to learn the difference between a surrender and an ambush. The silence in the house lasted exactly 90 minutes. It was a heavy, pregnant silence, the kind that exists in the split second between the pulling of a trigger and the explosion of the gunpowder. I spent that time sitting at the kitchen island, hands folded on the granite countertop, watching Evan Brooks arrange his files. He worked with the meticulous, unhurried rhythm of a man who knew he held a royal flush while his opponents were betting the deed to their souls on a pair of twos. At 12:15, the rumble of heavy engines vibrated through the floorboards. I did not move to the window this time. I did not need to hide. I stayed seated. Evan stood up, buttoned his charcoal suit jacket, and moved to stand just slightly in front of me, a physical barrier between the kitchen and the hallway. The front door, which I had locked, rattled. Then came the aggressive jiggle of keys. Renee. She was trying to jam her key into the lock, frustrated that it was not turning smoothly. She did not know I had engaged the deadbolt from the inside. Harley! Her voice was muffled through the wood, sharp with irritation. Open the door! The lock is sticking again. I nodded to Evan. He walked to the door and unlocked it. He swung it open, revealing the tableau of my family's arrogance. Renee was standing on the doormat, one hand on her hip, the other holding her phone. Behind her, my parents were walking up the path, looking satisfied and full of brunch, and behind them, blocking the entire driveway, was a massive moving truck with the words Elite Relocation Services printed on the side. 2 men in blue jumpsuits were already lowering the ramp. Renee looked at Evan, her mouth opening slightly. She blinked, her brain struggling to process the presence of a 60-year-old stranger in a 3-piece suit standing in the doorway of her new house. Who are you? She demanded, her tone rude by default. Where is Harley? Ms. Bauer is in the kitchen, Evan said. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that carried easily over the sound of the truck's idling engine. And I am Evan Brooks. I am the attorney for the trust. The what? My father, Martin, stepped up onto the porch, pushing past Renee. He looked Evan up and down, his face flushing with immediate defensiveness. We have a family lawyer, and you are not him. Harley needs to stop playing games. We have movers on the clock. Tell her to get her things and get out. I am afraid that will not be happening, Evan said. He did not move. He did not step aside. He stood in the doorway like a sentinel. Excuse me? Renee laughed, a high, incredulous sound. We have a signed agreement. Harley signed it this morning. She vacated. This is my house. Now move, or I'm calling the police. Actually, Evan said, reaching into his jacket pocket and withdrawing a folded document. "I strongly suggest you do not call the police, Ms. Bauer. If you do, they will ask to see the deed. And when they see the deed, they will arrest you for trespassing." The word hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Trespassing. My father scoffed. "Do not be ridiculous. I am the executor of the estate. I have the paperwork right here." He slapped the leather portfolio he was carrying. "We are transferring the title on Monday." "You are transferring nothing," Evan said, "because the estate does not own this house." I stood up then. I walked out of the kitchen and stood behind Evan. I saw the moment they spotted me. My mother's face went from confused to disappointed. My father's face went purple. Renee looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "Harley, what is this?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. "Why is there a strange man here? We had a nice breakfast. We agreed on everything." "I never agreed," I said. My voice was quiet. But in the silence that followed Evan's declaration, it sounded like a shout. I just listened. "She is lying!" Renee shrieked. She waved her hand at the movers who were approaching the porch with dollies. "Ignore him. Just start grabbing the furniture in the living room. Start with the sofa." The lead mover, a burly man with a clipboard, looked from Renee to Evan. He hesitated. Evan turned his gaze to the mover. "Sir, my name is Evan Brooks. I represent the Walter Bauer Irrevocable Family Trust, which is the sole legal owner of this property. I am informing you right now that these individuals," he gestured to my family, "have no legal authority to authorize the removal of any assets from this residence. If you cross this threshold and remove so much as a coaster, you will be liable for theft and destruction of private property. I have the sheriff's department on speed dial, and I have the deed in my hand." The mover stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at the truck, then back at Evan. He had been in this business long enough to know the smell of a domestic lawsuit, and he wanted no part of it. "We are out," the mover said, turning around. "We do not do disputes." "No!" Renee lunged forward, grabbing the mover's arm. "You are not going anywhere. I am paying you. I hired you." "Lady, let go of my arm," the mover said, shaking her off. "Sort your mess out. Call the office when you have a court order." He signaled to his partner. They walked back to the truck, rolled up the ramp, and slammed the back door shut with a clang that sounded like a prison cell closing. Renee stood on the lawn, staring at the retreating truck. She looked like a child whose balloon had just popped. Then she spun around, her face twisted into a snarl. "You little witch," she hissed, marching toward me. "You think this is funny? You think you can just hire some actor to scare us? Dad, show him the paper. Show him what she signed." My father pulled the notice of intent to vacate from his portfolio. He thrust it at Evan. "She signed it," my father shouted. "Harley Bauer, right there. She acknowledged the transfer." Evan took the paper. He glanced at it for less than 2 seconds before handing it back with a look of polite disdain. "This document is legally worthless," Evan said. "It lists the estate of Walter Joseph Bauer as the owner, but as of 3 weeks ago, the estate does not own this property. The property was transferred into the trust, and since Harley Bauer is the sole trustee, her signature on a document acknowledging a transfer from a non-owner to a non-beneficiary is nothing more than an autograph." My father froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a sickly gray color. "Trust?" he whispered. "What trust?" "The trust your father established 5 years ago," Evan explained, his voice turning cold. "The one he activated the moment he realized his family was more interested in his money than his legacy. The trust that names Harley Bauer as the sole beneficiary and the sole decision-maker regarding all real estate and liquid assets." "That is impossible," my mother gasped. She grabbed my father's arm to steady herself. "Walter would never do that. He knew Renee needed the house. He knew we had plans." "He knew exactly what plans you had," I said. They looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time, they were not seeing the daughter who fetched the coffee or the sister who gave up the purple bicycle. They were seeing the person Grandpa Walter had actually raised. He knew you would try to take it, I said. He knew you would try to bully me. He told me not to trust your words. He told me to trust the ink. Harley, baby, my mother started, her voice shifting instantly into that wheedling, manipulative tone she used when she wanted something. You are confused. You do not understand what you have done. This man, he has tricked you. We are your family. We are trying to protect you. Stop, I said. Just stop. You cannot do this, Renee screamed, stomping her foot on the porch step. Tears of rage were streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. I already told everyone I was moving in. I posted it on Instagram. I have contractors coming tomorrow. You cannot just steal my house. It was never your house, Renee, I said. It was Grandpa's, and now it is mine. Dad, Renee turned to him, wailing. Do something! Fix this! My father stepped forward, trying to regain his stature. Now look here, Mr. Brooks, I am sure we can work this out. If there is a trust, surely there are provisions for the rest of the family. I am Walter's son-in-law. I managed his affairs for years. You managed nothing, Evan corrected him sharply. Harley managed his affairs. You managed to visit twice a year. And as for provisions, the trust is absolute. It is irrevocable. It is sealed. Harley has total discretion. If she wants to let you in, she can. If she wants to ban you from the premises, she can. Evan reached into his briefcase and pulled out 3 envelopes. He held them out. These are formal notices of trespass, he said. They state that you are not permitted on the property at 1224 Lakeview Drive without the express written invitation of the trustee. If you return with contractors, they will be turned away. If you return with a locksmith, you will be prosecuted. If you return with a moving truck, we will call the state police. My father stared at the envelopes. He did not take them. You are serving us? He choked out. Your own family? I am protecting my client, Evan said. He placed the envelopes on the porch railing, right next to where Renee's hand was gripping the wood so hard her knuckles were white. This is insane, Renee sobbed. Harley, you are ruining my life. Why are you doing this? I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had ordered me to move out by Sunday so she could throw a party. I looked at the parents who had sat at that restaurant table and erased me from the narrative of their lives. I am not doing anything to you, I said calmly. I am just living in my house. You are the ones who are visiting. We will sue you, my father snarled. The mask of the loving patriarch had completely dissolved, revealing the greedy, small man underneath. I will hire the best lawyers in the state. I will drag this out for years. You will not see a dime of that money. Harley, I will bury you in legal fees. You can try, Evan said. But I drafted this trust myself, and Walter Bauer signed it while sound of mind and body. You are welcome to spend your own money trying to break it, Martin. But I promise you, the only thing you will deplete is your own retirement fund. Get out, I said. The command was soft, but it landed like a stone. What? My mother whispered. Get off my porch, I said. Get off my driveway, and take your notice of intent to vacate with you. I have some unpacking to do. My father looked at Evan, then at me. He saw the security camera blinking above the doorframe. He finally noticed it. He realized that every word he had just shouted, every threat he had made, had been recorded. He grabbed my mother's arm. Come on, Linda. We are leaving. But the house, my mother whimpered. We are leaving, he barked. He dragged her down the steps. Renee stood there for one last second, glaring at me with a venom that would have poisoned a lesser person. I hate you, she spat. I hope you die alone in this house just like he did. He didn't die alone, I said. He died with me. She turned and ran to her car. I stood on the porch and watched them retreat. I watched the expensive cars reverse haphazardly down the driveway, kicking up gravel, fleeing the reality they had refused to accept. When the last taillight disappeared around the bend, the silence returned. But this time, it was not heavy. It was not waiting. It was light. It was clean. It was the sound of a home that finally belonged to the person who loved it. "Well," Evan said, adjusting his cuffs, "that went about as well as could be expected." "Thank you, Evan," I said. "Do not thank me yet," he warned, his eyes serious. "Your father is a proud man, and Renee is a spoiled child. They will not stop here. They will come back. And they will come back dirty. Prepare yourself, Harley." "I know," I said. I looked up at the gray sky, which was finally beginning to break, letting a single ray of pale sunlight touch the water of the lake. "Let them come. I have the keys." The aftermath of the confrontation on the porch did not feel like a victory. It felt like the onset of a fever. The silence I had fought so hard to secure was quickly replaced by a low, buzzing static that seemed to emanate from my phone, my laptop, and the very air around me. My family realized they could not break the trust with a moving truck, so they decided to break me. The character assassination began less than 48 hours after I watched their taillights fade down the driveway. It started with the extended family. My phone began to light up with messages from cousins I had not spoken to since Christmas, and aunts who lived 3 states away. They were not checking in to see how I was coping with Grandpa's passing. They were checking in to see if the monster was real. "I heard you locked your parents out of the house," my Aunt Margaret wrote. "After everything they did for you? How could you be so cruel?" "Renee is posting that you tricked Grandpa when he was on morphine," a cousin texted. "She says you forged the dates." I did not reply. I sat in the living room with the curtains drawn, watching the accusations pile up like snow against a door. They were painting a portrait of me that was unrecognizable, in their version of the story. I was not the devoted granddaughter who spent 4 years changing catheters and managing dialysis schedules. I was a predator. I was a leech who had isolated a vulnerable old man, whispered poison in his ear, and stolen the family legacy while his mind was failing. It was a brilliant strategy because it played on the one thing people love more than a tragedy, a villain, and because I was quiet, because I was private, I was the perfect canvas for them to project their greed onto. Then came the legal threat. It arrived via courier on a Wednesday morning. It was not from the family attorney my father had blustered about. It was from a firm in the city known for aggressive, scorched earth litigation. The letterhead was thick, and the language was violent. They were not just suing for the house. They were filing a formal complaint alleging undue influence and elder abuse. Reading those words felt like being slapped. Elder abuse. I called Evan immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "They are saying I manipulated him," I told Evan, my voice cracking. "They are saying I took advantage of his dementia. Evan, he did not have dementia. He had kidney failure." "Calm down, Harley," Evan said, his voice a steady anchor. "This is a standard intimidation tactic. They know the trust is solid. They know the paperwork is ironclad. So, they are attacking the source. They have to prove that Walter was not of sound mind when he signed those documents, or that you coerced him. It is a high bar to clear." "They are dragging his name through the mud," I said, feeling a hot tear slide down my cheek. "They are making it sound like he was a puppet." "Then we prove he wasn't," Evan said. "I need you to go through everything. Harley, I have the legal files. But you lived with him. I need medical records. I need doctor's notes. I need anything that proves his state of mind in the last 5 years. If they want a war, we need ammunition." I hung up and went to the study. I had avoided this room since the funeral because it still smelled like his tobacco, and the ghost of him felt strongest here. But now, I had to disturb the peace. I pulled down the banker's boxes from the top shelf of the closet. These were the boxes my family had ignored because they looked boring. They were full of receipts, insurance forms, and medical logs. My family had wanted the silver and the art. They did not want the paper trail of a dying man's life. I spent 3 days on the floor of the study, surrounded by a sea of paper. It was grueling. Every document was a memory. Here was the log from the night his blood pressure dropped, and we had to call the paramedics. Here was the receipt for the wheelchair ramp I had installed with my own money because my father said it was too expensive. But as I dug, I began to find the shield Evan had asked for. I found the notes from Dr. Aris, his primary care physician, dated 4 months before the trust was finalized. The note read, "Patient is fully oriented ×4. Cognition is sharp. Patient expresses frustration regarding family pressure to sell assets. Patient explicitly states desire to retain control. Fully oriented, cognition sharp." I set that aside. Then, buried in a file labeled Miscellaneous Correspondence, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a copy of a letter sent to the County Social Services Department, dated 2 years ago. It was a petition for a competency hearing. It was signed by Martin and Linda Bauer. My parents had tried to have Grandpa declared incompetent 2 years ago. They had done it behind his back. They had tried to seize control of the estate while he was still alive, claiming he was unable to manage his financial affairs due to cognitive decline. Attached to the copy of the petition was the caseworker's report. It was short and brutal. Investigation closed. Subject is highly intelligent, articulate, and fully capable. No evidence of decline. Complaint appears to be motivated by financial disagreement. They had tried to bury him before he was dead, and they had failed. I sat back on my heels, staring at the paper. This proved malice. This proved that their current claims of undue influence were just a recycling of a failed plot they had hatched years ago. But the final piece of the puzzle was not on paper. I found it in the bottom drawer of his desk, underneath a stack of old National Geographic magazines. It was a small, digital voice recorder. Grandpa used to use it to dictate letters to his business partners when his arthritis made typing too painful. I picked it up. The batteries were dead. I swapped them out with fresh ones from the kitchen drawer and pressed play. There were dozens of files. Most were mundane. Grocery lists, reminders to call the plumber, notes about the garden. But the last file was dated 8 months ago. I pressed play. First, there was the sound of rustling fabric, like the recorder was being hidden in a pocket. Then, Grandpa's voice, sounding tired but distinct. "I am recording this because I do not think anyone will believe me otherwise," he whispered. Then, a door opened. Steps approached. "Walter, we need to sign these today." It was my father's voice. It was smooth, aggressive, the voice of a man closing a deal. "I told you, Martin," Grandpa said. "I am not signing over the power of attorney. I am perfectly capable of paying my own bills." "You are making this difficult," my father said. His tone dropped, becoming darker. "Linda is worried sick. You are forgetting things. You are slipping. If you do not sign this, we are going to have to take steps. We can put you in a facility. Walter, a nice one. But you won't be here looking at your lake anymore." "Is that a threat?" Grandpa asked. "It is a reality check," my father replied. "And that girl, Harley, you think she is helping you? She is just hanging around for a handout. She is useless. Walter, she is going to drain you dry. Sign the paper. Let us protect the money." "Get out of my house," Grandpa said. His voice was shaking, not with fear, but with rage. "We will be back," my father said. "Think about the facility. Walter, think about dying in a beige room with no view." The recording ended with the sound of a door slamming. I sat in the silence of the study, the recorder heavy in my hand. I felt sick, physically sick. I had known they were greedy. I had known they were selfish. But I had not known they were monsters. They had threatened to put him in a home, to take him away from the only place he loved, just to get their hands on his checkbook a few years early. And they had called me useless. They had told him I was a leech. Grandpa had kept this. He had recorded it, and he had hidden it, knowing that one day I might need to hear it. Or maybe he just wanted to make sure that if they ever succeeded, the truth would survive. I wiped the tears from my face. They were not tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of fury. They wanted to sue me for undue influence. They wanted to accuse me of manipulating a vulnerable old man. I had the medical records proving his sanity. I had the caseworker's report proving their prior failed coup. And I had a tape of my father threatening a dying man with eviction if he did not surrender his wealth. I stood up. The gloom that had been hanging over me for days evaporated. The shame of the rumors, the hurt of the family rejection, it all burned away in the heat of this revelation. I was not the defendant in this story. I was the prosecutor. I picked up the phone and dialed Evan's number. It was late, past 8 in the evening, but he answered on the second ring. "Harley?" he asked. "I found it," I said. My voice was hard, steady, unrecognizable from the girl who had cried on the phone 2 days ago. "What did you find?" "I found everything," I said. "I found the proof that they tried to commit him 2 years ago, and I found a recording of my father blackmailing him." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, I heard the distinct sound of a chair squeaking as Evan sat up straight. "Bring it to me," Evan said. "Tomorrow morning. Do not make copies. Do not upload it. Bring the originals directly to my safe." "I will," I said. "Harley," Evan added, his voice low, "if this is what you say it is, we are not just going to win the defense, we are going to end them." "That is the plan," I said. I hung up the phone. I looked at the recorder in my hand. I looked at the boxes of paper surrounding me. They had started this war because they thought I was weak. They thought I was the easy one, the one who would fold under pressure, the one who would surrender the bike. But they forgot one thing. I was the one who listened, and now, the whole world was going to listen to them. The morning after I found the voice recorder, the world looked different. It was no longer a place of vague emotional slights and petty family dramas. It was a crime scene, and I was finally holding the magnifying glass. I brought the recorder and the box of medical records to Evan Brooks' office at 9 o'clock sharp. He took the device with a gloved hand, as if it were a murder weapon, which, in a legal sense, it was. But before we could discuss the strategy for deploying that nuclear option, Evan told me we needed to look at the bones of the estate. "You have seen the trust document," Evan said, spreading a large flowchart across his desk. "But you have not seen the engine that drives it. People think wealth is just money in a bank account. Real wealth, the kind your grandfather built, is structure." He pointed to a box at the top of the chart labeled Ironwood Land Management, LLC. "What is this?" I asked. "This," Evan said, "is the actual owner of the lake house, and the investment portfolio, and the 3 commercial lots in the county that your father does not even know exist." I blinked. "I thought the trust owned the house." "The trust owns the LLC," Evan corrected. "It is a layer of protection. Your grandfather set up Ironwood Land Management 10 years ago. He moved every significant asset into it. The trust owns 100% of the membership interest in Ironwood, and you, Harley, are the sole beneficiary of the trust. Why make it so complicated?" Evan opened a file drawer and pulled out a thick, leather-bound binder. Because he was not just protecting his money from the government or creditors, he was protecting it from Linda and Martin. He flipped the binder open to a tab marked 2016. "Your grandfather wanted you to see this when the time was right. This is the history of the loan your mother took out." I leaned in. The document was a promissory note, signed by my mother, Linda Bauer, and my father, Martin. The amount was staggering. $250,000. "They borrowed $250,000? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "They called it a bridge loan for a business venture your father was starting," Evan said, his voice dripping with professional disdain. "A consulting firm, but if you look at the disbursement records..." He slid a spreadsheet over the promissory note. It showed where the money had actually gone. There were no office leases or equipment purchases. There were payments to a luxury car dealership. There were charges for a 3-week tour of Europe. There were withdrawals for lifestyle maintenance. "They spent it," I said, "on themselves." "Every penny," Evan confirmed. "And here's the kicker. They never paid back a single dime. When the term was up, they told Walter that family does not charge interest. They defaulted. That was the moment your grandfather realized that if he left the estate to them, it would be gone in 5 years. They would eat the seed corn." I stared at the numbers. $250,000. That was the year I was working double shifts at a diner to pay for my textbooks, because my parents said they were cash poor and couldn't help with my tuition. They were driving a new luxury sedan paid for by Grandpa's money while I was counting tips to buy ramen noodles. "He wrote you a letter," Evan said gently. "It was attached to the LLC formation documents. He wanted you to understand the logic." He handed me a sealed envelope. It was not like the cryptic note I had found in the desk. This was thicker. I opened it. The handwriting was stronger here, dating back a few years. "My dearest Harley, if you are reading this, it means the wolves are at the door. I am sorry I had to leave you with a fight, but I knew I could not leave you with nothing. Your mother and father believe that love is a transaction. They think that because they share my blood, they are entitled to my sweat. They are not bad people, perhaps, but they are weak people, and weak people are dangerous when they are given power they did not earn. I gave them a loan in 2016. I hoped they would build something. Instead, they bought toys. That was when I knew. If I gave them this house, they would mortgage it to fund their illusions. They would lose the land I walked on with your grandmother. I chose you not because you are the youngest, and not because you were the one who took care of me when I got sick. I chose you because you are the only one who knows the value of $1 and the value of a promise. You never asked me for anything. That is why you deserve everything. Do not let them make you feel guilty. They have already taken their inheritance. They spent it on first-class tickets and German cars. This is the balance being restored. Stand tall. Grandpa." I put the letter down. My hands were trembling, but not from sadness. I felt a cold, hard clarity settling into my chest. For years, I had internalized their narrative. I thought I was the extra child, the burden. I thought they couldn't help me with college because they were struggling. But they weren't struggling. They were stealing. They had siphoned off $250,000 from the man I loved, wasted it on vanity, and then had the audacity to demand the rest of the pie the moment he died. This wasn't just greed. It was financial abuse. "They have already taken their inheritance," I repeated Grandpa's words. "Exactly," Finn said. "And now, we are going to remind them of that." Evan drafted a formal letter that afternoon. It was not a polite legal notice. It was a declaration of war. It detailed the existence of Ironwood Land Management. It referenced the unpaid promissory note from 2016, attaching a copy of their default. It stated explicitly that their inheritance had been prepaid and squandered, and that the trust was exercising its right to offset any potential claims against that unpaid debt. And then, in the final paragraph, Evan dropped the hammer. He mentioned the existence of audio evidence regarding threats made to the decedent, implying potential criminal liability if they persisted in their harassment. We sent it via courier. The reaction was almost immediate, but it did not come in the form I expected. There was no screaming phone call from my father. There was no banging on the door. Instead, at 4 o'clock that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Renee. "Can we meet? Just us? No lawyers? Coffee at the grind? Please. Harley, Mom is a mess." I showed the text to Evan. "She wants to settle," Evan said. "She knows they are cornered. She is going to try to appeal to your emotions because they have no legal leg to stand on." "Should I go?" "It is up to you," Evan said. "Legally, you do not have to, but sometimes, hearing them beg is the only way to get closure." I went. The grind was a neutral space, a busy coffee shop in the downtown district where we used to go when we were teenagers. Renee was sitting at a corner table. She looked different. The arrogance that usually radiated off her like heat waves was gone, replaced by a frantic, brittle energy. She was wearing sunglasses, but I could see her eyes were puffy. I sat down across from her. I did not buy a coffee. "Harley," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I pulled my hand back. She flinched. "What do you want, Renee?" I asked. "Dad showed us the letter," she said, her voice low and hurried. "This thing about the loan, I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know they borrowed that much money." "It doesn't matter if you knew," I said. "The money is gone." "Look, I know you are angry, Renee said, and you have every right to be. But Harley, you have to understand, we are in trouble, real trouble. She leaned in, lowering her voice further. Dad leveraged his own house to cover some bad investments last year. He was counting on the sale of the lake house to pay off the balloon payment. If he doesn't get that money, the bank is going to take their house. They are going to be homeless. Harley, Mom is terrified. I looked at her. I waited for the sympathy to rise in my chest. I waited for the old Harley, the doormat, to kick in and say, "Oh no, we have to help them." But all I could think about was the spreadsheet, the vacations, the cars, the years of me working for minimum wage while they played rich. That sounds like a problem, I said. But it is not my problem. Renee's face hardened. How can you be so cold? They are your parents. They are the people who tried to commit Grandpa to a facility so they could get his money faster. I said, I found the petition. Renee, did you know about that? Did you know they tried to lock him away? Renee looked away. Her silence was an answer. She knew. Okay, she said, her voice shifting from pleading to bargaining. Okay, fine, mistakes were made. But listen to me, we don't need the whole house. Just cut us in. Sell the house. Give us 50%. You keep the other half. That is over $500,000 for you. You can buy whatever you want. We just need enough to clear the debt. Please, just sign a settlement agreement, and we will walk away. You want me to sell Grandpa's house? I said slowly. To pay off Dad's gambling debts? It is just a house. Harley, she snapped, her volume rising. It is wood and brick. Why do you care so much? You are going to let Mom and Dad lose everything over a stupid principle? It is not a principle, I said. It is a consequence. I stood up. The answer is no. Renee, no settlement, no split, no sale. The house stays in the trust. The money stays in the trust. And if Dad loses his house, maybe he can ask you for a loan. I hear you have done very well for yourself. Renee stood up too, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. The mask of the concerned sister vanished, revealing the desperate, vicious creature underneath. You are going to regret this, she hissed. We are not done. Dad hired a new lawyer, a shark. He is going to drag you into court and paint you as a manipulator. He is going to play that recording of you and Grandpa. Whatever you think you have, he will twist it. Let him try, I said. I have more than just a recording. Renee, I have the truth, and for the first time in my life, I have the money to defend it. You are a selfish little brat, she spat. And you, I said, looking her dead in the eye, are trespassing on my time. I turned and walked out of the coffee shop. I could feel her eyes burning into my back, but I did not turn around. I walked to my car, got in, and locked the doors. I took a deep breath. I had just refused to save my parents from financial ruin, by all societal standards. I should have felt guilty. I should have felt like the villain they were painting me to be. But as I drove back toward the lake house, my house, I felt lighter than air. I realized then that Grandpa hadn't just left me money. He had left me the ability to say no. He had bought my freedom with that estate. Renee was right about one thing. They were not done. My refusal would trigger the final assault. They would drag me to court. They would try to destroy my reputation publicly because they couldn't beat me privately. But I was ready. I drove back to the house, parked in the driveway, and walked inside. I went to the study, sat in Grandpa's chair, and picked up the phone. Evan, I said when he answered. I met with Renee. And? She offered a split. I turned it down. Good, Evan said, because I just got a notification. They have filed an emergency injunction. They are trying to freeze the assets. We are going to court. Harley? When? Friday morning. I will be there, I said. And Evan? Bring the heavy artillery. I hung up. I looked out the window at the lake, shimmering under the afternoon sun. The water was calm, but the storm was coming, and this time, I wasn't going to hide in the basement. I was going to stand on the roof and command the lightning. Friday morning arrived with the sterile precision of a scalpel. the venue for the final confrontation was not a courtroom, but a mediation conference room on the second floor of the county courthouse. It was a neutral ground, characterized by beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and a long mahogany table that was polished to a shine so high it reflected the tension in the room like a mirror. I arrived 10 minutes early with Evan. I wore a navy blue blazer and slacks, looking less like the grieving granddaughter and more like the CEO of my own life. Evan carried a single, thick briefcase. He looked calm, almost bored. This was his arena. My family arrived exactly on time. My father, Martin, walked in first, flanked by his new attorney, a man named Mr. Sterling, who wore a suit that cost more than my car and smelled aggressively of cologne. My mother, Linda, followed, looking pale and shrunken, clutching a tissue in her hand. Renee brought up the rear. She refused to look at me. She sat at the far end of the table, tapping her manicured nails against the wood in a staccato rhythm that betrayed her anxiety. Mr. Sterling wasted no time. He did not introduce himself. He did not offer a handshake. He simply opened his folder and laid his hands flat on the table, leaning forward to intimidate me. "Let us be clear," Sterling began, his voice a practiced baritone designed to rattle witnesses. "We are filing for an immediate injunction to freeze all assets held by the so-called trust. We are alleging that the decedent, Walter Bauer, was under extreme duress and cognitive decline when he signed these documents. We are also alleging that Ms. Harley Bauer used her position as primary caregiver to isolate the decedent, manipulate his emotions, and effectively steal the inheritance that rightfully belongs to the natural heirs." He slid a paper across the table. It was a sworn affidavit from my father, stating that Grandpa had been confused and paranoid in his final years. "My clients," Sterling continued, gesturing to my parents, "are the victims of a calculated scheme by a young woman who took advantage of a dying man. We are prepared to take this to a jury, and I promise you, Ms. Bauer, a jury will not look kindly on a granddaughter who disinherits her own mother." My mother let out a small, staged sob. My father put his arm around her, glaring at me with a mixture of anger and righteous indignation. I did not flinch. I did not look at my parents. I looked at Evan. Evan adjusted his glasses. He did not open his briefcase yet. He simply looked at Sterling with a faint smile. "Are you finished, Mr. Sterling?" Evan asked. "I am just getting started," Sterling snapped. "We want the trust dissolved. We want the house returned to the estate, and we want a full accounting of every penny Ms. Bauer has spent since the date of death." "Very well," Evan said. "Now, let us look at the facts." Evan opened his briefcase. He did not pull out a single paper. He pulled out 3 distinct stacks of evidence, laying them out on the table like tarot cards predicting their doom. "First," Evan said, resting his hand on the first stack, "the timeline. You claim Ms. Bauer manipulated Walter in his final days. However, the Walter Bauer Irrevocable Trust was established 5 years ago, long before his health declined, long before Harley was his primary caregiver. The decision was made when he was playing golf 3 times a week and running his own investment portfolio. The activation of the trust recently was merely a procedural trigger, not a new creation." Sterling frowned. "He was 75. Senility can start early." "Second," Evan continued, ignoring him and moving to the second stack, "the medical evidence. I have here the certified records from Dr. Aris, Dr. Lim, and the nephrology specialist who treated Walter for the last decade. Every single annual checkup includes a cognitive assessment, in every single one, including the visit 2 weeks before he died. He scored a perfect 30 out of 30 on the mini mental state examination. He was not only competent, Mr. Sterling, he was likely sharper than anyone in this room." Evan slid the medical file across the table. Sterling glanced at it, his brow furrowing as he saw the dates and the doctor's signatures. "And finally," Evan said, his voice dropping an octave, "we have the motive." He picked up the third stack. This was the financial audit. "Your clients claim they were disinherited," Evan said, looking directly at my father. That is factually incorrect. They received their inheritance in 2016, specifically on May 12, 2016, when they borrowed $250,000 from Ironwood Land Management, a company solely owned by Walter Bauer. My father stiffened. Renee stopped tapping her nails. They signed a promissory note, Evan said, sliding the copy of the defaulted loan across the table. They never paid it back. Walter Bauer did not cut them out of the will, Mr. Sterling. He simply deducted the advance payment they had already taken and squandered on luxury cars and vacations. The trust is merely balancing the books. Sterling picked up the promissory note. He read it. He looked at my father. You didn't tell me about this. It was a family loan, my father stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. It was informal. Walter said we didn't have to pay it back immediately. The document says otherwise, Evan said. It lists a maturity date of 2018. You are in default. Technically, the trust could sue you for the interest. The room went quiet. My mother had stopped crying. She was staring at the table, her face ashen. This is irrelevant. Sterling tried to pivot, though his voice had lost its thunder. Financial disputes do not prove mental competence. We still contend that Harley Bauer exercised undue influence to prevent reconciliation. We contend that she poisoned his mind against his family to ensure she kept the rest of the assets. Poisoned his mind, I repeated softly. I reached into my bag. I pulled out the small digital voice recorder. What is that? Renee asked, her voice shrill. Grandpa left this for me, I said. He recorded it 8 months ago. He wanted to make sure there was no ambiguity about who was poisoning whom. I placed the recorder in the center of the table. I pressed play. The sound of the recording was clear in the acoustic silence of the room. First, the rustling. Then, Grandpa's voice. And then, my father's voice. If you do not sign this, we are going to have to take steps. We can put you in a facility. Walter, a nice one. But you won't be here looking at your lake anymore. The color drained from my father's face so completely he looked like a corpse. And that girl, Harley, you think she is helping you? She is just hanging around for a handout. She is useless. Walter. My mother put her hand over her mouth. Think about the facility. Walter. Think about dying in a beige room with no view. I let the recording play until the sound of the door slamming echoed through the speaker. Then I pressed stop. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb crater. Mr. Sterling slowly closed his folder. He took off his reading glasses and placed them in his pocket. He looked at my father with an expression of pure professional disgust. You threatened to institutionalize him? Sterling asked quietly. And you recorded it? I was just trying to motivate him, my father sputtered, his voice high and panicked. He was being stubborn. We needed the signature to refinance the house. We were desperate. We had to do it, Renee shouted suddenly, slamming her hands on the table. You do not understand. The bank was calling every day. He was sitting on millions and letting us drown. It wasn't fair. Renee, shut up, my father hissed.
No, Renee screamed, turning on him. It is over, Dad. Look at them. They have everything. Harley won. She has the tape. She has the loan. We are going to lose our house. And it is all your fault because you couldn't get him to sign one stupid piece of paper.
That is enough, Evan said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the chaos like a knife. He looked at Mr. Sterling. We are filing a motion to dismiss your injunction, Evan said calmly, and we are attaching this audio recording to the public record as evidence of extortion and elder abuse, unless, of course, your clients wish to sign a full release of claims right now. Sterling looked at his clients. He saw a father who was a blackmailer, a mother who was an accomplice, and a sister who had just admitted their motive was financial desperation. We will sign, Sterling said. What? My father gasped. No, we fight this. Martin, Sterling said, turning to him with cold eyes. If this tape gets into a courtroom, you are not just losing the lawsuit. You are looking at criminal charges for extortion. Sign the paper. Walk away. Pray she does not call the district attorney." Evan slid the final document across the table. It was a mutual release and settlement agreement. It stated that Martin, Linda, and Renee Bauer acknowledged the validity of the trust, waived all future claims to the estate, and agreed to vacate the premises of their lives from mine permanently. My father's hand shook as he picked up the pen. He looked at me one last time. There was no love in his eyes, only the hatred of a man who had been exposed. "You are a cold-hearted witch," he whispered. "He was my father-in-law." "He was your bank," I corrected him, "and the account is closed." He signed, my mother signed, weeping silently. Renee signed, slashing her name across the paper with such force she tore the page. Evan took the document. He checked the signatures. He placed it in his briefcase and snapped the lock shut. "We are done here," Evan said. My family stood up. They looked small. They looked defeated. They walked out of the room without looking back, a procession of ghosts who had finally been exorcised. I remained in my chair for a moment. I listened to the hum of the air conditioning. I felt the solid wood of the table under my hands. "Are you okay?" Evan asked gently. "Yes," I said. "I am." "You did it, Harley," he said. "You protected him." "No," I said, standing up and smoothing my blazer. "He protected me. He just needed me to be brave enough to use the shield." I walked out of the courthouse into the bright, blinding sunshine of the afternoon. The air smelled of rain and pavement. I walked to my car, the 7-year-old sedan that I had paid for myself. I got in and turned the key. I thought about the lake house. I thought about the empty rooms waiting for me. I thought about the silence, which would no longer be a waiting silence, but a peaceful one. I would paint the kitchen yellow. I would plant a garden. I would live the life Grandpa Walter had wanted for me. A life that was mine, bought and paid for with loyalty and truth. I put the car in gear and drove away. I did not look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me but dust. Thank you so much for following my journey through this storm. I would love to hear where you are listening from. So please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on whether my family got what they deserved. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help more people hear the truth.